Ok, mesdames et messieurs, bonjour à vous tous. Bienvenue à l'Université de Neuchâtel. Et je suis très heureuse de vous accueillir aujourd'hui. Pour information, on est à peu près 240 inscrits. Donc merci à vous tous de vous être inscrits. Il y a à peu près 200 personnes qui vont arriver ou qui sont arrivées en ligne. It is my honor today to welcome Harry Surden, professor at the University of Colorado Law School and associate director at CodeX at the Stanford University. Professor Surden is a world-renowned expert in the field of law and artificial intelligence. He has been researching the legal implications of the use of AI for over 20 years already, and therefore has a huge amount of experience in this field. He also has a great deal of insight into the risks that AI can present to us all. I met Professor Surden on a research stay at Stanford last year, and I saw him there again this spring when Silicon Valley was buzzing with the launch of ChatGPT. This tool proved to be progressing at a considerable speed, and this surprised all the experts and led hundreds of so people to sign an open letter calling for a 6-month moratorium on the research and development of this technology. This open letter mentions the fear of seeing the emergence of uncontrollable AI that would surpass human beings and pose profound risks to society and humanity. This letter was circulated 3.5 months ago, and, well, we are still here, so it's a good sign. Humans' fear of being controlled or replaced by AI is in part linked to their inability to understand how an AI system works. This inability results in particular from the opacity of algorithms, but also from AI's tendency to amplify bias and discrimination, due to the fact that it has no ethical consideration. So it is therefore essential to understand how a tool like ChatGPT works. And this is very important to understand it, to overcome this fear and learn how to take advantage of this technology to improve our living conditions and well-being. So I'm delighted that Professor Surden has kindly agreed to come to Neuchâtel to talk about the interactions between ChatGPT and more broadly the LLMs, so large language models, and the law. We'll find out how these AI systems can be useful for the practice of law. The presentation will last around 40 minutes, and then you will be free to ask all the questions you want to Professor Surden. So Harry, I'd like to thank you very much for joining us here today, and I give you the floor. Thank you.
So thank you so much for having me here. It's such an honor to be here. Thank you to Florence and Blaise, and to the university officials who so kindly showed up. It's such a beautiful campus and a beautiful city and a beautiful country. Switzerland is one of my favorite countries in the whole world. It's so beautiful, so it's an honor to be here. Thank you for those kind words, Florence. As Florence said, I am professor of law at the University of Colorado, but I also have a computer science background. I am associate director at Stanford, and I was a software engineer. So a lot of my research has to do with how technology works and explaining that to lawyers. So that's what I will be doing today, too, because I know many of you have a law background. This will be the structure of my talk. Today, we'll talk a little bit about what are large language models. Importantly, I want to stress the giant leap in AI technology that happened last year. This is really important to understand that how AI technology was progressing and then took a giant jump. We'll talk about some of the capabilities, and I'll try and give you an intuition about how GPT works, and then we'll talk about how AI technology can be used in law. So let's just talk a little bit about some of these topics here. When I talk about AI technologies, how it can be used in law, we'll be wondering, there are a lot of tasks that lawyers do. Lawyers do they do document production, such as contracts, patent applications, court filings. They do case analysis and legal analysis. They analyze legal documents. They solve legal problems. So we'll be asking what, if anything, can this new technology do that couldn't be done before. So let's dive right in. We're going to see, I'll be talking a lot about LLMs, which are large language models. This is a new class of what we call generative artificial intelligence technology. It's generative, we will see, because it's able to create things, generate. And the best known example is ChatGPT. How many people here have used ChatGPT? Okay, so almost everybody. Great. And it's able to generate fluent output, much more capable than previous AI technologies. But interestingly, it's also able to do legal production. So what I'm showing you here is an example of GPT-4, which is what I will be focusing on, and I'll explain the difference in a moment, producing a merger contract between two companies. And it can do a very good job, much better than any other technology could ever do before. And you should see, this is what would maybe take a lawyer, a professional lawyer, hours or maybe days to do. This is able to do a pretty good draft in 20 seconds automatically without a lawyer. So I've done over 300 experiments on GPT-4 to try and vet its quality, and it can do a pretty good first draft of a lot of legal documents, so we'll be seeing that. So the question will be for us to see today, what will the capabilities and the uses of these technologies be in the practice of law, also in the administration of law, government officials applying the laws, judges or bureaucrats applying different systems. Will this be useful? Is it good enough today? Almost will be my answer. Not quite good enough, but very close, much closer than we've ever been. We're not very far off. But what are the limits too? Where should we be very careful about using this? And then where is it likely to go in the near future? So let's just step back a moment and do an overview of GPT and large language models. So most of you have used ChatGPT. So ChatGPT is a chat-based interface to an actual technology that's underneath called GPT. So we're going to talk about that technology and understand how it works, because this is really important. As Florent said, if you don't know something, you fear it. But if you understand it, you don't fear it. So we're going to try and understand it, because I'm of the view that we don't need to be scared of this. We just need to understand it. This is a tool like any other tool. So GPT stands for Generative Pre-trained Transformer. And I'm going to be walking through each one of those words to understand, and then we'll go even deeper to understand exactly how GPT works. So let's start with the G, generative. It's called generative because it generates text one word at a time using AI to predict the next word. Now this is amazing because all it is ever doing is predicting the next word given all the words that have been given to it before. Yet, as we shall see, just by predicting one word at a time, it's able to do all sorts of amazing things, like write contracts, solve problems, answer questions, do analysis, summarize text. But at its core, it's just predicting that one word at a time based upon the next. So that's the G part. It's generative. And what this means is if you study artificial intelligence, there are many different ways you can use artificial intelligence. It's not always or even usually generating text, right? Sometimes you can classify images, or you might use it to predict things. In this case, it is generating text, so it's generative. That's the G. Pre-trained. This is going to be very important. We're going to talk about large language model technology is part of something called machine learning in AI, which I'll talk about. But basically, pre-training is the idea of taking the technology and exposing it to billions and sometimes trillions of words and sentences and training it to be able to predict the next word based upon the sentences before it. So GPT 3.5 and GPT-4 have been exposed to a huge portion of the internet and Wikipedia, also books, and what it's gone through is it has looked at each sentence in Wikipedia and tried to predict the next word, and then it does it again and again and again 1 trillion times. So we're going to see how that works. So these are called large language models for 2 reasons. Number one, they've been trained on so much language, large trillions of words, millions of books, and also because they're large in the number of parameters, which we'll see what that means, but those are basically the different mathematical numbers that are used to encode the data. So these are particularly large, so they're called large language models. There were also much smaller language models in the past. So that's why you see the word LLM, because they're so huge. Okay, so as I said, you may have heard artificial intelligence is kind of divided into 2 categories. One is called machine learning, and the other is called symbolic knowledge representation. This AI, large language models like ChatGPT, are an example of machine learning because so machine learning is a set of techniques that spot patterns in data. So in this case, the data is the text of Wikipedia and the internet, and the patterns are predicting the next words. So it's learning those patterns in there. So if we look at an example of artificial techniques, this is an example, GPT is an example of machine learning, a specific type of machine learning called deep learning, and a specific application called large language models. So the learning, as we will see, comes from the pre-training process. And we'll see how that works in a second. But this is the very expensive part of creating these. So these can take a month, 6 weeks. It can cost $10 million to have it learn all the patterns in 1 trillion sentences of text. Okay, so the final word is transformer. So this is really interesting. This is probably one of the biggest breakthroughs that has led to GPT. So this is a technology architecture that was developed by Google in 2017, and it basically took over AI. And we'll talk about how it works in a second. But in general, it's a way of compressing any type of information, whether it's text, video, music, audio, into a standard representation that you can look for patterns in. And it's very important. There's a paper called Attention is All You Need, and I'll explain how this attention mechanism works in a minute. Okay, so there you have it. GPT, generative, because it's generating, pre-trained, because it's pre-trained on trillions of text, and transformer, this is the technology that Google invented to allow you to pay attention to. So here's another way of looking at it. Machine learning, neural networks, deep learning, transformer architecture. Okay, so it's important to understand the history of GPT to understand the differences here. So GPT was created by a company called OpenAI, which took Google's inventions, and then they're not affiliated with Google, but they took Google, which published these inventions, and made a huge number of improvements on it, so much so that their technology is much better than Google's. So they did a much better job of using Google's own technologies. There are 5 main versions. The last 3 I want to talk about. GPT was released in 2020. This was kind of one of the bigger breakthroughs where we were getting very close to good technology. But the biggest breakthrough was ChatGPT, or GPT 3.5, which took place in November 2022. As I'm going to show you, there was a giant leap in capability between GPT-3 and GPT 3.5. And then importantly, in March of 2023, just a few months ago, was GPT-4. So most of the examples I will be showing you are GPT-4. And it's very important, GPT-4 is the most advanced version. So if the version that you get for free is GPT 3.5, it's very good, but it's not nearly as good as GPT-4. So if you try any of the things that I show you, you can replicate anything I show you here. Just make sure you're using the most advanced version, GPT-4, because it's much better. One mistake that people make is they try out a lot of these things on the free version, and it's not as good, but that's the older version. So you can tell actually by the icon, GPT 3.5, the free old version, is green, and GPT-4, the icon is either black or purple. Okay, so that's how you can visually tell. Okay, so in 1 year, this is one of the most important points I want to stress, there was a giant leap in capability. AI went from being not so good to really good in 1 year, which is very unexpected. Most people thought this was going to approach on a linear trajectory, such that we wouldn't see what we were seeing for 5 or 10 more years, but it went from, it was a giant leap like that. Okay, so let's see how this leap happened. GPT-3 was released in 2020, and it was quite good at generating fluid text, but it couldn't do anything like answering questions or solving problems. All it could do was produce, news stories or poems or things like that, which was quite impressive at the time, but nobody thought it was an artificial intelligence breakthrough. We just thought it was a very interesting text generator. What's interesting is we can see how big an advance happened in 1 year because, fortunately, OpenAI keeps the old models online, so you can try the same things with GPT-4, the new model, and the old model, and compare them side by side, and that way we can see in 1 year how big a leap had happened. So I'm going to show you, I've been testing this large language model technology for 10 years, and I have a series of common sense questions that I've been asking the large language models to see if they were intelligent. And these questions have two properties. First of all, they're the kinds of things that a 3 or 4-year-old child would be able to answer, right? So we want to see if the AI can answer it. And then second, these are things that are unlikely that anyone has ever written down before because we want to test to make sure it's just not copying text that's out there, but it's actually thinking of new things. So one of the questions that I asked was a very silly question, right? How many legs does an apple have, right? Combien de pieds a une pomme? Right? It's very silly, but it's important because if you asked a child this question, a child would know the answer, and a child would say an apple doesn't have legs. And also, probably no one's ever written that down before, right? Nobody's ever asked the question, how many legs does an apple have? So it can't be copying it. So if you look at the old technology from 2022, early 2022, it confidently answers and says an apple has 4 legs, right? That's not very smart. Okay. And then in terms of law, I was testing out its legal capabilities. This is from early 2022, and I asked it to write a legal document, and this is what it produced. So really bad. If you're a lawyer, this is 3 lines, it doesn't make any sense, right? So not very good. So nobody was really impressed by GPT-3 in 2022. As I like to say, it was not exactly the shining beacon of legal intellect. So that's when we were all surprised when ChatGPT came out that had a couple of engineering advances that we talked about, which were really good. So what amazed everybody, including me, ChatGPT was an improvement on GPT-3 in just 8 months. And what was an emergent property of ChatGPT was reasoning and problem solving. And that was very surprising. That wasn't expected at all. We just expected ChatGPT to be able to produce stories or poems or things like that. We didn't expect it to be able to solve problems. That surprised everybody, including the creators. So here's an example of GPT-4 actually solving a very hard puzzle I made up that, it doesn't really matter what it is. It's about coins and weighing. It's one of these puzzles that you might see in a, brain teaser book. The important point is that it can solve that, right? Which is very surprising because all it is doing is predicting one word at a time. So we didn't expect it to be able to solve problems. So that was amazing to me. The problem-solving ability from a program that was generating one text at a time. So when I saw this in November, I said, oh my God, actually, you talked about the OpenAI, the letter. I'm actually friends with the person who wrote the letter. I showed him ChatGPT. He hadn't seen it because it came out the day, I saw it the day it came out. I showed it to him and he said, oh my God. So the other major breakthrough was not just problem solving, it's the ability to understand. So the previous technologies could not reliably respond to any question you could ask it. So you would ask the old technologies, what's the capital of Switzerland? And maybe it would say, the horse rode into town or something. A lot of times it wouldn't make any sense. But GPT 3.5 or ChatGPT can respond sensibly and responsively to just about anything you ask it, which is amazing. Nothing else could do that before. So you have these two capabilities, the ability to respond sensibly to anything you ask it, and the ability to do reasoning and problem solving. I thought back in November, what about law? Law is a technology law uses text as its technology. This is a technology used for text. This can do problem solving. Maybe this can be used in law. So I gave a whole bunch of experiments on this. And I said, what about a patent application? Right? In the United States, you write patent applications for an invention. You submit it to the patent office. And I teach patent law at my university. And it's amazing. It can write a really good first draft patent application. Again, this is GPT-4, not the free version, that is good enough to maybe not be issued by the patent office, but at least not be dismissed by the patent office. And a patent in the United States costs 5,000 to 10,000 euros to do something like that. And this did it in 30 seconds. So it's amazing. Now, again, this is a first draft. We will see there's some limits to it. But even getting a first draft of a patent document is not something you could have done before last year. Okay, so remember this? This was the old GPT-3, January 2020. This is what a legal document looked like. GPT-4, let's ask it. So what I did here was I took just a random set of facts from a legal document in the United States, and I pasted it in here, and I said, write a legal motion using these facts, and it did an amazing job. I verified everything it did, and this is incredible. This is something that would have taken a lawyer days or hours, minimum hours, probably days to do something like this. So, okay, so remember the Apple question? Now I asked GPT-4 the Apple question. Let's see what it answers. So, how many legs does an apple have? Be sure to explain your answer. And first of all, it gets it right. It knows an apple is a fruit. It doesn't have legs, so that's a good sign. All the other technologies couldn't answer that question, so that's good. And it gave a very detailed answer. But then I decided to push it further to see how smart it was. And I was testing what they call a theory of mind, right? And what you're doing in a theory of mind is seeing whether the computer can put itself in the position of other people and see things from their perspective. So what I asked it here, I said there are two people, person A and person B. Person A has an apple. Person B took person A's apple and went into the other room. Person A hears chomping sound from the other room. What does person A believe about the apple from the other room? And it's able to say, well, person A believes that his apple is being eaten in the other room based on the chopping sounds. That's amazing. No other technology has been able to do it. Then I asked it to ask about the emotions of person A. So if person A had been intending to eat the apple, person B came, took it in the other room, how would person A feel about that? And again, it got it right. It said person A would probably feel angry or upset because their apple was being eaten without their permission. So then I asked it even more. I said, 5 minutes from now, where is the apple going to be, right? So this is an amazing question because you're asking it to put it in the imaginary situation and then go into the future and then imagine where the apple is likely to be. And it correctly gets it. It says some of it will be in person B's stomach, digesting. Some of it might be in the trash can, the core. So that, to me, that's absolutely amazing. We went from an apple has 4 legs to this kind of theory of mind in 1 year, right? So this is meant to illustrate the giant leap. So this is why I say GPT, especially GPT-4, is one of the biggest breakthroughs in artificial intelligence in the last 20 years, because we couldn't do this. For those of you who have not been studying this, none of this was possible at all last year, right? It wasn't until ChatGPT came along. Okay, so now that we understand that, let's understand how does GPT-4 works, because as Florence said, we need to understand so we're not afraid. So I'm going to go over some of the technical details here, but I'll try and understand it. And these are some of the topics we're going to cover, but we won't go into too much detail. Okay, so one of the biggest breakthroughs that allowed GPT to work was the representation of words like, apple, palm, or Shah, cat, as vectors. So vectors are lists of numbers. And it didn't seem possible that you could represent the meaning of a word like palm or Shah or chien as a list of numbers. Yet you can. And this was an invention, again, by Google and also by Stanford in 2004, something called word vectors or word embeddings. This is one of the biggest breakthroughs. And here's how to think about it. Imagine you take every word that you know, dog, cat, bird, house, maison, whatever it is, université, you put it in each one on its own row, and then you think about the different features or qualities that you could categorize it by. So for example, we start here, we go across. A dog is a pet, right? A cat is a pet. A bird is sometimes a pet. A dog has fur. A cat has fur. A dog is not a building, right? This is a building. A dog is not a building. So you see what happens if you're in one of these categories. You get a high score if you're one of those things, if a dog is a pet. But if you're not one of these things, you get a low score. So -9. A dog is not a building. A cat is not a building. Okay, so basically word vectors go through and figure out all the different features or aspects of any word, whether you're a dog, a cat, a building, a vehicle, and you figure out whether you're high on it or low on it. So how does it do that? Well, it's very interesting. It does that because we use similar words in similar ways in text when we write them down. So for example, I took my pet cat to the vet. The vet is the animal doctor. I don't know how you say that in French. So I took my cat to the vet. I took my dog to the vet. I pet my cat. I pet my dog. So it turns out when you use words, when you write words in similar ways, it starts to learn similar numbers for those words, right? It learns that cats and dogs and birds are pets. So you take this and you release it on the internet, and suddenly you can learn all the different ways, the meanings of words represented as numbers. So this is a huge breakthrough. Nobody thought you could do that. So I just want to point out, it doesn't quite work like this in the real world. You don't really have these neat categories like this, but I'm just showing you. Okay, so once you do that, you can actually represent visually words that are similar to each other. So a cat and a dog mathematically are close to each other. If you have pets on one axis, the x-axis, and animals on this axis, you can see that cats and dogs are almost always pets. A bird is sometimes a pet, but not always. And a cow, a vache, is not usually considered a pet. So that's really interesting, right? So that was the first breakthrough. So the second breakthrough was this idea of neural networks, which was actually an old idea that came from the 1940s, but it was reinvigorated around 2012 with something called deep learning. So neural networks is an AI approach that's roughly inspired by the human brain, but it's actually not at all the way the human brain works. It's just an analogy to the human brain. And it can encode almost anything mathematically. So this is how it's usually represented here. And these are called the parameters, the different numbers. And we'll see how this works. But basically, GPT is a giant neural network. So all large language models these days are neural networks, this new technique. And the way we teach it, as I told you, was by pre-training. So pre-training, again, is the idea is you take this neural network and you release it on the internet, on Wikipedia, millions of books, and you ask it to predict the next word. So if it sees a sentence, the cat sat on the blank, in the United States, we would guess mat, right? That would be your natural guess. The cat sat on the mat. So let's imagine that you have a neural network here, and it's trying to guess the next word. It doesn't really know anything, right? So it's going to do a bad job. So let's say it goes through and it guesses banana, right? So this is a bad neural network because it has the wrong answer. So this is how it learns. So you say, no, the right answer is mat, not banana. So you tell the neural network to go back and train itself, and you see this number here. That's the number that told it to go banana. So you say, lower that one, and this one would have told it to go to mat. So you raise that one. So let's look what happens here. You go back. This is called back propagation. Now you switch it, and you say, don't listen to this one, listen to this one. And now you run it through because you have new weights. And now it's going to go through this path here. And it's going to learn mat, right? So this is how the learning happens. This is machine learning. It didn't know before, and then you went and taught it, lower this one that says banana, raise this one that says mat, because we know the right answer is mat. And you do that 1 trillion times, and it learns all of the patterns of the language, including French or English. So this is a huge breakthrough here, and this is also how you encode word vectors, if this makes sense. So you do this for every single word out there. You do this over and over and over and over again, and it starts learning these numbers here. In the case of GPT 3.5, ChatGPT, there are 175 billion of these numbers. And then in GPT-4, there are rumored to be 1 trillion, although OpenAI has not told us. So what you can think of going on here is a huge portion of the textual output of humanity has been compressed into numbers into this neural network large language models. So it's very interesting. Okay, this is another big breakthrough here. The transformer architecture I talked about. In English, at least, words have multiple meanings. This word crane can either mean a bird or construction equipment. So when you do a word embedding for the word crane, it comes up halfway in between bird and halfway in machine, right? That's its word vector. It doesn't have any, it's called its lack uncontextualized context. So what the transformer does is allows you to figure out the meaning of the word based upon its context. So if you read a sentence here, you have a prompt to ChatGPT, and it has words that sound like nature, like birds and wetlands, right? What the transformer does is it mathematically combines all those words together, and then it mathematically nudges the word crane in the direction of bird. So it comes out the other side as the bird version of crane, mathematically encoded. So that's how the transformer works. That was the amazing invention by Google, is you could encode the context of what's being asked mathematically by nudging it in the direction of the words in context. By contrast, if you ask a different prompt here that has things to do with construction, workers, etc., what it's going to do is nudge the word mathematically in the direction of the construction equipment. So that's all this is. That's the big breakthrough, was encoding the context mathematically by multiplying words by the prompt, and you get an encoded version of a word that mathematically reflects the meaning nudged slightly over. That's the big breakthrough there. Okay, so I hope that intuition makes sense. I'm happy to explain more how that happens. I'm going to move quickly through this, but one of the big ideas, this was never thought, was if you scale up ChatGPT, it starts to learn general ideas about language, how language works, how the world works. It understands in quotes. It doesn't really understand. It has a representation of different aspects of the world based upon patterns in language, and that is unexpected and amazing, but that's the idea of transfer learning. This is the idea that you have a base model that is capable of doing almost anything, and you can take that base model and then fine-tune it for specialized tasks. One of the biggest breakthroughs from OpenAI was something called instruction fine-tuning. So it turned out that GPT-3 had a lot of capability in it. They just had to extract it, get it from GPT-3 to GPT 3.5 ChatGPT. And this was a great breakthrough. What they did was something called instruction fine-tuning, where they taught GPT 3.5 how to respond by giving it examples, handwritten examples of questions and answers, input and output. And they did this 15,000 times, and this is called instruction fine-tuning. And this was what allowed ChatGPT 3.5 to be responsive. And then the final breakthrough from OpenAI was something called reinforcement learning from human feedback. So basically, they trained a different AI system called reinforcement model to learn what the difference between a good output from GPT was and a bad output. So they took GPT, had it produce 5 different outputs, and then this other AI system would say, this is a good one and this is a bad one. And they did that millions of times till they tuned it to be able to produce good outputs. So that's basically how we got here, how we got to GPT. And those are the big breakthroughs where we stand today. So as I said, GPT can be used in law, and there's been a giant leap in 1 year. That's the most important takeaway of this talk. A lot of people don't realize that. And then I just want to point out that I study the capabilities of GPT, what it can and can't do. I'm not necessarily advocating that lawyers do this or not. This is not, I'm more of a researcher. I'm not saying you should or should not do it, but I'm testing it. I also want to see whether, in my opinion, it can do good work. So I've been testing, this is an example of a very hard evidence hypothetical in law in the United States. It doesn't really matter what it is. It just knows that this is something none of my students would get right, and this is able to get it right. It's able to do its reasoning, able to explain its answer. It's been able to do very good legal analysis of various things, provided that you prompt it correctly. Another example, it can take statutory law. So this is an example of US copyright law, where I'm taking the copyright code, I'm pasting it in something called prompt augmentation, where you take the information that you want it to be analyzed, you put it in the prompt, and then you ask it questions. And I'm asking it to do copyright analysis. Again, I teach copyright law. It does a very good analysis, as good as my students can do. So this is all very surprising because the previous technology could not do this. So this is something we're developing at Stanford, which is a lot of people in the United States don't have access to lawyers. They rely on their friends and their family or Google to answer their legal questions. So this is a legal question and answering service where people type in their problems and it does legal issue spotting and it gives them kind of advice and asks them questions. And we're working at, this is a work in progress, but we do error checking on the back end. So here what's going on is we're imagining somebody is having a problem with their landlord. I don't know the word in French, but the person who you pay the rent to, and you don't know the answer. This is acting like a lawyer, asking you the right questions, spotting the issues, and giving you advice. And it works pretty well, actually. Okay, so it's not all perfect. Let's just get that off the table. There are a lot of limits of GPT. So like I said, we're almost there. We're not quite there, but we'll be there very soon. So of course, if you're not careful, the technology will make up things. There are ways to get, that's called a hallucination. There are ways to reduce that, and I'm happy to talk about some of those techniques. You can get it very low by doing clever error checking. So I think this is a short-term problem, but sometimes it does just engage in basic reasoning errors. So the key is you have to check it. It's not perfect. So there are a couple ways to make it more accurate and reliable. There's something called prompt augmentation, which I showed you. This is where you add the text or the law that you want analyzed to the prompt itself. We can talk about that, something called chain of thought prompting, reflection and verification. These are all ways to make sure that GPT-4 is more reliable in law. But the most important thing is building a layer of checking on top of GPT-4. So this is what we do in here is, you see, the user here is not, when we answer the legal question, is not working through GPT. It's working through us, and then we're talking to GPT, checking it before we give it to the user. So that's called verification and building on top. Okay, and of course there are ethical concerns at this point with using GPT. There's privacy, security, so I don't recommend that lawyers use GPT-4 right now, but in the near future, there will be legal applications, already there are, like case text and things like that, and there was a case in the United States where some lazy lawyer had GPT type something in, didn't double check it. That was very silly. It's kind of like a senior lawyer would never ask a junior lawyer to write a draft and turn it into the judge, right? The senior lawyer always double checks. So that was the equivalent of trusting your first-year lawyer and giving it to the judge. So don't do that. In the future, that will be less of a problem because you'll have systems that are specialized. There are all sorts of other limitations that Florence mentioned. I'm happy to go into that. But let me just stop here for the moment and take any questions that you have. Yeah. Merci.
Okay, so I open the floor to questions in the room. Yes?
I assume I can speak loudly enough. I'm trying to write my PhD thesis on replacing judges with AI, so that's it's highly relevant. I was wondering during my research, taking a step back from ChatGPT and LLMs, whether LLMs are actually the best model to do that kind of task, considering that it's generative, but it's not ideal at understanding and taking into account various facts, and because cases are very complex. So in that field, do you see that prompt augmentation, for instance, would be sufficient to have enough input to solve a legal dispute, or would we need more groundbreaking changes to the model to have something that could work as to solve a complex legal dispute?
Yeah, it's a great question. So I think there are a lot of societal questions about whether we want to do that, replace, because judges serve kind of a human mediating function for human disputes. But I do think there's a lot of simple legal disputes out there that, judges are overwhelmed, they have too much work, so maybe this could be helpful for low stakes disputes. And for that, I do think that large language models like GPT-4 are pretty good at this point. I wouldn't use 3.5, but I think GPT-4 and then the next version, provided that you've done a good job, it can pretty reliably, and the facts are simple and the stakes are low, it can do a pretty good job of figuring out what's important. You can give it examples. So I'm happy to talk about that with you. But for anything important, I wouldn't want to replace a judge, because I think judges serve an important human factor. So, yeah.
Merci. Thank you very much for your presentation. I was just wondering if by definition, ChatGPT or these kinds of LLMs are conservative, because they base themselves on statistics or vectors or whatever, and by definition they cannot be very creative. So have you tested by asking, for example, find me a new solution for X, Y, Z, or something like that?
No, this is a good question. So if you mean, do you mean politically conservative or creatively conservative?
Creativity.
Okay, yeah. So you can get them to be very creative. So if you go directly to the OpenAI website, there's actually things that you can actually toggle the creativity level based upon, you can increase the randomness. So randomness is kind of associated with creativity. So you can directly, they call it the temperature, you can change the temperature to make it more creative. Another way is through the prompt, you can actually tell it to be more creative in the prompt. So I've gotten it to be very creative, actually. And you can also make it creative by giving it, augmenting the prompt with two very random different, you could have a Wikipedia entry on Berlin and a Wikipedia entry on apples and say, tell me something about them, and it'll come up with something interesting to say, yeah.
So before we go into the room, maybe one of our participants online is asking, what is your opinion on AI regulation, on the issue of AI
Oh, okay. Yeah, this is a great question. So I also work in AI regulation, and I'm the first to say that we don't know what to do. So this is, I currently think that the EU AI Act is outdated because it's based upon pre-large language model technology. It's risk-based. So before ChatGPT came along, there was a very predictable model where you could see what the AI was capable of, predict the risks, and then you explain the risks to regulators. That is no longer the case. This is a general purpose technology that can't be predicted. So I think we kind of have to wait and see. I'm likely to think that if we use the old modes of regulation, we're likely to do more harm than good. So I honestly don't know at this point. Yeah.
Are you going to have a new legislation in the US, or can you say something about it?
We might, but I'm worried because the people that study this, like me, really don't know what to do. So everybody wants to regulate, but nobody really knows what to do well. And this, I think it's a big problem if you just do something, if you do regulation just to regulate without doing, there's no good theory about how to regulate this well. I think it's also being driven by a lot of existential fear, which and existential meaning it's going to destroy society, not that it's going to disrupt jobs, which I think it will. I don't believe in the existential fear because I think it's not based on evidence. It's based on, people being scared. And this is a common pattern we see with any new technology, that people are scared of it. So I hope that doesn't drive the US regulation. Yeah.
May I? Thank you very much for your presentation, really interesting. Just wanting to get back to the relationship between ChatGPT and lawyers. You mentioned that you would not recommend to lawyers to use it at this stage, but before you said it could produce good first drafts. Maybe there is a middle way in which they could use it, but not as a final, or for legal research, or for reviewing maybe court filings, or what is your opinion on this?
Yeah, I know a lot of lawyers. I'm a lawyer myself, and many are not very sophisticated in computers. So if they are sophisticated in computers and very careful, I think that would be okay. But if they're not really good with technology right now, there aren't enough, or if they're willing to put in the effort to double check it very carefully, that's okay. In my experience, they might not be as willing to do that. So you have to be very careful. You also have to be very careful about private, sensitive information for your clients being sent to OpenAI. So there are a lot of kind of issues that you need to be very careful with. So that's why I recommend, for some things, maybe it's okay. A first draft, there's no private information, but kind of be very careful at this point. I wouldn't wholeheartedly recommend it.
Thank you very much. I have a very self-interested question. So we know that LLMs and ChatGPT really excel at texts that are highly schematic and for which a lot of training data is available. So what happens when we get into issues that are way more specific? So I'm thinking, for example, could LLMs help with texts that describe the legislation and governance of a small university in Switzerland?
For example, absolutely. I think that they can. As part of my experiments, I've been taking things like local city rules in the United States and asking it to summarize it, asking questions, and it does a really good job. So I very much think you could take the rules of, say, the University of Neuchâtel, put them into GPT-4 and ask questions about it and get very good answers and summaries.
Well, Harry, you're also a teacher, and I wanted to know what is the stand of the debate in your law school or in the US more generally to integrate such teaching and use for basic classes. How do you want to do it? You want to use like the ChatGPT as a source to be critically analyzed by the students. We know like you have papers to hand in during the semester. How do you deal with all these kind of questions and issues?
Yeah, this is a great question. So, there are a couple issues. One issue is where do we use it in the classroom? I haven't used it yet in the classroom, but one way I'm interested in using it is terms of having individual tutors for students. So ChatGPT can be trained to be a tutor for new law students who don't really understand the questions of law, and it's an infinitely patient tutor that is awake at 4 a.m. that can answer silly questions. So that's where I think it can be very useful, and that's where I'm interested. We are concerned about testing. So all of our law tests happen at home on your computer. And I've tested my exams with GPT-4, and it can do a very good job. So we are concerned a little bit about cheating. And I've been studying some of the latest techniques about how to use it in the classroom for like critiquing, like you said. I don't know where I stand on that. I might try some experiments, but I don't really know how I feel about that right now. Yeah, I welcome any thoughts though on that.
Another question from the chat. Are there languages due to their linguistic specificities that cannot be learned by AIs, or is the LLM applicable to all?
As far as I can tell, I think GPT-4 has something like 120 languages in there. It definitely does better the more training data there is. So the vast majority of the training data is in English, not surprisingly, and then some of the other more popular languages. But as far as I can tell, it's, most of the major languages of the world, it can do just fine in, as far as I have been aware. Yeah.
Quick question. Outside of academia, I'm an in-house counsel advising medium-sized medtech publicly traded company. And obviously, we're thrown into the deep waters as in-house counsels to advise the business. What are the risks? How do we cope with that? And many companies have actually banned the ChatGPT use within the companies because of all the risks that have been made public in terms of leak of confidential information, copyright infringement with outputs, or bias and other type of output that could be very problematic. So do you believe the total ban currently is a total knee-jerk reaction, which is probably not so good? Rather, we should focus on trying and testing in-house this type of solutions and see what are the specific use cases and how to manage and mitigate the risk.
So yeah, I'll give you an analogy.
Yeah.
Back in 1995, there was this technology called email and the internet, and a lot of law firms banned it. We are never going to send client emails because it travels over the public internet. And can you imagine? It goes your client files, and now look. So I think we're very much the same situation where everybody's scared, and the first couple of years, there's going to be a knee-jerk reaction, but ultimately, I think it's a short-term thing. I think even OpenAI now was actually taking the text that you type in and using it to improve its own training data. So if you typed in trade secrets into GPT, it was taking it. They're now no longer doing that, and they say they don't do that anymore. I personally think that's a very small risk because there are 1 trillion parameters. So any small piece of information is like a piece of sand in a giant pile. It's not going to make a difference. So it's not like your secrets go in and then they come out. They kind of drop in and kind of go away.
Although we've seen that with Samsung, right? They've had an issue of the leakage of some pretty important information. So
yeah, so I think that probably happens because that was part of the training data, not because of the prompting. So when, a substantial portion of the internet gets ingested, so they probably in that was Samsung's training data. But I would very much doubt it was because of prompting by users. Yeah, but it's possible, I suppose. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Another question from the chat. It was retired, but the question was, how can lawyers use this technology without jeopardizing the confidentiality?
Yeah, so, well, what I would do if I wanted to do a draft contract, I would put, fake names or like company A and company B and, kind of de-anonymize whatever you're doing. So like when I gave the example of the merger agreement, you could definitely have it write in a merger agreement with company A and company B and just replace the names in Microsoft Word. I definitely think it's very good at reliably summarizing text. So I would recommend using it today to summarize legal opinions, summarize statutes, summarize contracts. You can ask it questions about contracts. As long as, the general principle is if you can take the document and stick it in the prompt and then ask it questions about the document you've stuck in the prompt, it's very reliable about that, as long as it's not too long. So that's what I would recommend.
So do you have, well, yes, okay. Last question, I think.
Thank you very much for such an interesting presentation. I have a question, please. If it's possible that in the future artificial intelligence technologies will be used for prevention of corruption?
Oh, absolutely. This is a great question. So there's a lot of focus on the negatives of artificial intelligence, and I think they're there for sure in terms of disrupting jobs. And I think, like any new technology, whether it's the internet or social media or machine learning, it's going to disrupt jobs in the short term, but it doesn't get rid of new jobs generally. And in general, technology creates more jobs. So I want to highlight, you're pointing some of the benefits of AI, and I think we shouldn't overlook the benefits. There's going to be benefits in terms of research, scientific research. So what this technology is very good about, connecting the dots, as they say in English, something that's over here and something that's over here that seems no human would connect. And then GPT-4 has all the knowledge of the world, and it says, oh, I can see this connection. So in terms of corruption, this is the perfect example where I could see, this technology saying, wait a minute, something fishy is going on here and over here. Maybe there's some corruption raising a red flag that needs to be investigated. I'm very optimistic about some of its beneficial uses in that regard.
I'm sorry. Just to follow up on that, it's really interesting, but I don't understand who owns the technology in the end. If the IE is figuring out all of the world's problems, who owns those problems? Who's gonna benefit from those? Everybody maybe, but my company might have a patent or something else.
Wait, so say more. Who? I don't quite understand the question.
Who ultimately, like, if I wanted to use it maybe to develop a new medical product or something?
Yes. Oh, okay.
Would that actually belong to me if I use the?
This is a great question. So I teach intellectual property. This is the branch of intellectual property. I'm actually testifying before the U.S. Congress in September about copyright. I'm recommending that we need to start from first principles because we've never seen anything like this before. There's no good answer to that question, so we need to decide what we think is the right answer and change the laws to implement it. The current copyright and patent laws are not adequate because they've never anticipated. So I don't know that there's a right answer, but I do think that the current laws are inadequate because they never had this problem to deal with. It's a great question. Yeah, sure.
Maybe just a last question, if I may. I'm sorry. Very interesting topic. What is the situation in academia? If we are using ChatGPT to improve research, should we quote it? Should we thank ChatGPT in a footnote? How would you recommend to move forward with this?
I think just like in intellectual property, the norms are evolving. So I don't think there's a right answer right now to that. And I don't think you could go wrong right now as whatever you're doing because there are no norms. I do expect in the next couple of years we will develop norms around when you have to do attribution, but right now it's just an open book. So, yeah. It's a good question. Yeah.
So do you have another question? Because the question brings another one. No. So thank you very much, Harry. Thank you so much.
Thank you. If you have any other questions, ask ChatGPT.
Yeah. So it was a very enlightening speech. Thank you very much, and thank you for your honest transfers.
Yes.
It's very important. Thank you very much. You are all welcome to an aperitif outside, and you can ask Harry private questions if you want. I think so. Thank you very much.
Thank you.